This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com and all of your favorite podcast platforms, as well as the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube page, where we are live Tuesdays at 11 a.m., and that's where some of you are finding us right now. So welcome into the live viewers, and also hello after the fact as well. Maybe you're listening to us on your ride to wherever you're going to celebrate Thanksgiving, but wherever you're listening, we do appreciate you as always. I'm Craig Smoak, joined by Grayson Grundhoefer. Also got Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well, and we are here to talk about, well, the final week of the regular season. Just like that, we have arrived in the final week of the regular season. Hard to believe that we are already here, and hard to believe that, especially where we were earlier in the season, we are talking about a 7-4 Baylor Bears football team, but that's where we are. 7-4 after a big win this past weekend against Houston for the Texas sweep, and now the closeout at home against the red-hot Kansas Jayhawks. So, Grayson, before we dive into Kansas, man, I guess just your feeling coming out of this game, and 7-4. That's obviously a mark that I don't think really anybody had out there. I mean, doesn't matter where you look. I think maybe 6-6 was pushing it for most people. 7-4, maybe 7-5 as a final. Maybe some people had that. I think that's about pushing it, though. I don't think there was any more optimism than that for probably anybody in Baylor circles. So to see where they are, to see what they did on Saturday, just in general, your thoughts on here being in Thanksgiving week and just being at the end of the road already.
If people did have 7-5 before the season, they definitely didn't after Baylor started 2-4. I think there was optimism that they could still get to 6-6. I know we had talked about a lot during that time period that, if they could go in and find a way to beat Texas Tech, maybe they could get to 6-6, and they've overachieved now. And I mean, to be clear, coming into the year, the Vegas line was 5.5. So Baylor has definitely jumped up this season. They've made a statement over these last 5 games. They've won against the 3 Texas schools in the Big 12 and are 3-0 against the old Southwest Conference, which is really something random but kind of cool to see as well. This is just pretty great, I think, for the program in general. This is a big time as well. When you finish your season like this and you're kind of leaning into the momentum that you talked about in the offseason, it's not only big for the team and the confidence going forward, it's also huge for recruiting in the transfer portal. I mean, when players are looking at you and they're like, oh, how good are they going to be next year? And you rattled off 5 straight wins. You might get to 6, maybe even 7 straight wins. That's a lot of momentum for a program, and that's a lot of those things that I think recruits are very interested in.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, it's a hot program right now. You've got, obviously, Kansas playing really red hot. You've got Arizona State. But besides that, I mean, they're right there in contention for hottest programs in the Big 12 and certainly in the country as well. So, yeah, here we are, 7-4. Got Kansas rolling into town and a big finale at McLean Stadium on Saturday afternoon. So we're going to get into this past game in depth a little bit, and then we'll turn our attention towards previewing Kansas, and then we'll get into the mailbag and have a couple of other scattered notes and whatnot as well. But I guess before we dive fully in, how much hope are you putting out there in terms of the very narrow pathway to a Big 12 championship? I mean, I don't think anybody's taking it all that serious because what would need to happen is so off the wall and unlikely, but I guess that's just another kind of thing you can hold on to as a Baylor fan or a coaching staff member or whatever. It's like, yeah, there's probably no shot at it, but the fact that they've rallied from where they were 0-3 to even being in the mentions for this, and yes, 9 teams are, mind you, but that is the state of the conference right now, but they could finish as high as 5th in the league. They could also finish as low as 9th, depending on what happens this weekend. But do you think that matters, like the standings? Does that, even though the records are all sort of close, is there a significant difference in finishing 5th versus finishing 9th, in your opinion?
Massive difference. And it matters so much in which bowl you go to. I mean, if you finish in ninth, I mean, you're talking you might end up at the Armed Forces Bowl playing at TCU Stadium again. Or you might end up playing at SMU Stadium as well. There's another bowl that could be that situation as well. And so, yeah, it's huge because if you get to fifth, that opens up the opportunity for you to potentially play in the Alamo Bowl, potentially play in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, which I know these bowls seem irrelevant, but getting the opportunity to play against an SEC school or getting the opportunity to play against an ACC school, I think is a big deal. You know, you look at some of those other bowls and there's a chance you're playing a UTSA or you're playing a Navy or playing an Army. I just don't think those aren't the games that I think Baylor has really gotten up for, and I think that's a bit of an issue, and maybe that changes this year, but I think in general you want to be in the best bowl possible so that you can put your brand up against another premier brand.
Yeah, and I think if you finish more towards that fifth spot, you're looking at maybe the Texas Bowl,
Yes.
and that would be a lovely bowl to go to. I think you saw the turnout in Houston this past weekend for Baylor fans. There's a lot of alumni down there. There's a lot of casual supporters down there, and they've been there within recent history. Had the successful trip against Vanderbilt.
And that's an SEC tie-in as well.
Yeah, and that's an SEC Big 12 type of game. So that's more of what you'd be probably looking at if you finish with a win this weekend. But if you were to finish with a loss, then, yeah, you're looking at maybe going and playing in the First Responder Bowl, which is SMU Stadium, which location-wise would be nice, but probably not like a huge draw. And there's also the possibility of, returning to the Armed Forces Bowl at TCU Stadium, which, you know, the last experience there, obviously, like they treated everybody well, but it was just the ice storm and all of that. But, yeah, there's the Pop-Tarts Bowl, the Liberty Bowl. I don't think you really want to go to Memphis if you don't have to. You
kind of lose on those.
Yeah.
If you finish ninth, it's going to be you're not getting in the Pop-Tarts Bowl for sure, and you're probably not getting in that bowl either. I think the Rate Bowl is another one, but in general, you're taking yourself out of a different tier of bowl game if you do lose this weekend, and if things go bad, you know, if they go in different directions for other teams that are around you in the standings, then you finish ninth. I do think that's a big deal. Now, I did want to mention, because you did ask, you know, what kind of hope am I holding out for them making a Big 12 championship? I do not see that at all.
Yeah.
They would need 3 of the 4 teams ahead of them to lose. And then they are one of the top teams to get in. But I honestly think when we go through predictions, if we are able to get to that, I'm probably only going to pick one of them to have even a remote chance of losing.
Yeah, I don't see that happening either because of the 3 you need, like maybe one of those games is even all that realistic at the moment. But also, I think Baylor's going to have a hard enough time just beating Kansas. So the fact that we're even being able to talk about bowl games is a blessing, though, because that's not something that looked like it was necessarily in the cards at the beginning of the year and certainly in the first 5 or so games of the season. But 5 straight wins were they 4 or 5 straight wins now? It's 5 straight wins now for the Bears, right? Is that what they're at now?
Straight.
Yeah, it's
hard to
5
imagine.
straight,
It's just like almost impossible to imagine, but there they are at 7-4 because they were at 2-4 at one point in time. But yeah, you're just like, wow, you look up and boom, this season's flown by and it's 5 straight wins. So because of that, we're talking about bowl slotting and finishing in a certain spot in the Big 12. And so that's a pretty cool deal that we're even being able to discuss that. So how did we get here, at least this week? Well, 20-10, Bears over the Houston Cougars, as Houston's season will wrap up this weekend with their regular season finale. They needed to win both to go to the postseason, so you knocked them out. You went and got a big win down against a renewed rival and down in a very important city in terms of your fan base and also recruiting and all those different types of things. And we knew going into this game that really, I mean, I said it at the end of our pregame show. I said it, I think, either during this show or in writing or whatever. I know I said it a couple of times last week. This was a game that Baylor was really going to have to kind of almost find a way to lose. They were going to have to play really poorly to lose this game. And sure enough, they started off like the way you'd want them to if you were a Houston fan hoping for an upset bid, because they kind of played right into what Houston needed. But luckily, it didn't matter in the long run. So 20-10, Bears win in what was an ugly game. You kind of played into Houston's formula, not only with the mistakes you made early, but also just the style of game was very much their kind of game. But You showed your physicality, you showed your toughness, and you showed your ability to find ways to win even when your quarterback wasn't having his best day. So how did it start? It started off on a bad note, and like I said, the exact formula that Houston needed to try and win this football game is the Bears would get the ball first and said, it's going to take like Sawyer Robertson throwing like 2 or 3 interceptions and like a couple pick sixes, and that didn't happen exactly, but pretty close to it. 3 plays into the game, Bears 3rd down and 5. Sawyer Robertson intercepted by Jeremiah Wilson as Houston gets the ball on their first drive after the pick and sets up at the Baylor 33-yard line. 3 plays into this game, Sawyer Robertson, who's throwing like no interceptions this year, save for a couple, and they've been very much in the past, and it's been very scattered when it has occurred. He's been very good about that, but bam, 3 plays in, and I'm thinking, oh, geez, this is like exactly what we talked about. Is it going to be that kind of a day? Well, it at least started off that way.
Right, and there's 2 guys on Houston's defense that you shouldn't be attacking, and it's Jeremiah Wilson and A.J. Halsey. And Baylor paid the price 3 times throwing at those 2 guys. And Jeremiah Wilson on this one, he just kind of stepped in front of this throw. And it was one where I think Hal Presley was supposed to run a slant, but it doesn't really matter because Jeremiah Wilson read the route completely. And Sawyer he didn't recognize the choice that Hal made to make it more of a fade or a go or something. Because Hal just completely went upfield and Jeremiah Wilson's just standing there for the interception. But again, I was kind of shocked by Baylor's strategy in this one when, the cornerbacks for Houston have been good all year. This really didn't feel like a Josh Cameron, Hal Presley type game. This felt much more like a Ashton Hawkins, Michael Trigg type game in the slot. And as we saw, they were able to hit on that. But early in the game, they were testing, the strength of Houston's defense with Jeremiah Wilson, and they paid the price for it.
Yes, they did. So 3 plays in, Sawyer Robertson gets picked off. Houston gets the ball, and they get prime real estate. Again, said last week, Sawyer Robertson's going to have to turn the ball over, and most of all, in turning the ball over, give Houston short fields because their offense isn't very good. It's exactly what you did here. But part of the reason why their offense isn't very good is because they also turn the football over a lot. And Zion Chris with an interception in the end zone on 1st and goal at the Baylor 5 after they had gotten a fresh set of downs. They get 1st and goal, 5-yard line, opportunity to strike first, and Zion Chris is picked off by Devin Bobby, and that's why Houston is Houston. But Baylor will take it, and so Sawyer Robertson gets to wipe his brow and go, okay, that didn't cost us. We get the big turnover. Defense answers on a day where they would answer a lot. 4 turnovers in total for the Bears, 3 interceptions, and a fumble recovery on the kickoff return late in the game that helped kind of seal this thing. But, yeah, Devin Bobby, the first of 3 picks on the afternoon.
And remember last week, Devin Bobby dropped an interception in the end zone that ended up leading to a touchdown. It went right through his hands and then was caught by West Virginia for a score. So in this situation, he makes a play. And you need guys to make plays. We've mentioned it all year. He made a big one. And honestly, I think in some regards you could say that was the biggest play of the game because Houston just was never able to get a lead on Baylor, and I do think that matters. When you're playing at home, if you can get out to a lead, kind of control the game, control the tempo, it really helps a team that doesn't have much of an offense and really just wants to sit on the ball. But because they weren't able to, Baylor's able to build a lead and then just kind of sit on it. And I think that was a huge difference in this game, to be honest, and it was early.
So after Sawyer Robertson had thrown a pick on their first drive, they go 14 plays, 80 yards on their second drive. Give it to Bryson Washington a handful of times just to kind of settle in there. And then Robertson throws it around a little bit before Bryson Washington comes back with some carries. Robertson again. It was just those 2 really on this drive kind of just going back and forth as far as having the ball in their hands. And eventually it is a big-time throw, but a massive catch by Michael Trigg. Highlight reel catch for the tight end, and a guy who's just really come on here in the second half of the season. A lot of conversation around this guy now about his NFL future and, can they possibly get him back next year and all these types of things. But regardless of what the future holds, the present's pretty good. So on 3rd and goal, a big-time catch to give them a 7-0 lead and a nice response to the earlier turnover.
I mean, it was a great catch by Michael Trigg, and he really showed just crazy flashes in this game. Just his athleticism, speed, ability to make plays on the football. I kind of wish he would have, just kind of caught this ball and came down with it with two hands, but because it was a little nerve-wracking, right? He catches it, brings it down in one hand, and then it gets knocked out, and you're just kind of like, oh, man, are they going to call this not a touchdown? But the play stood, so it ends up being a touchdown. Good throw by Sawyer Robertson, and nice to see Michael Trigg really make the impact that I think we anticipated. He has made an impact all year, but this first half he had against Houston where he almost has 100 yards just in the first half was really impressive.
So Houston down 7-0, and that's not what they want, because that's, again, every score for them, it's like 7's 14, 14's 21. It's just their offense is so abysmal. And they actually today fired their offensive coordinator. In the last couple of hours, they've fired Kevin Barbay. Sean Bell, former Baylor quarterback, has taken over for the time being. Don't know long-term what they'll do there, but so there you go. Sean Bell, now the Houston interim OC. So they're already getting to making changes as they get ready for the offseason after Saturday. So Houston gets the ball back, nothing doing. Delay of game hurts them right out of the gates and puts them behind the chains, which is basically a death sentence. Can't move the football. They punt. Baylor gets the ball back up 7-0. They're unable to get much going as a holding call kind of derails things at the start of this drive, and then try to run Pendergrass a little bit for naught. So you punt, and then do you have anything on that particular right there?
Just really quick, it felt like this happened in this game a lot. Baylor hits on a 35-yard reception to Michael Trigg, and then immediately a holding call, and then you're just kind of set back, and it really felt like they were going to go up 14-0 and just start running away with this thing. And so this drive right here was just kind of the culmination of what happened, I felt like, to this offense all day, where it's just like you make a big play and then you set yourself back. You make a big play, then you can't score. And I think this drive was kind of a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I mean, Trigg obviously on a little bit of a heater here in the first half, had the touchdown, had the big gain there. But, yeah, penalty basically stalls that drive or interrupts it from becoming more than it would have otherwise. And they end up kind of just sputtering around midfield before deciding to punt it back and make Houston try to drive the length of the field. Palmer Williams actually kicks it a little bit too far, touchback, and so just really doesn't – that's not working out your favor either. You only flip them 22 yards, and they get the ball at their 20 rather than trying to pin them down and maybe get a safety or something like that, given how their offense plays. So things are kind of going a little squirrely early on, but then they get really squirrely after giving the ball back to Houston – after getting the ball back from Houston. 3 plays into this drive, after a couple of Bryson Washington runs on 1st and 10, Sawyer Robertson with his second interception of the quarter as he throws it to Jeremiah Wilson, who promptly deposits it in the end zone for a pick six, 41-yard interception return. It's 7-7. And again, this is exactly what you could not do if you were Baylor, is turn the ball over, turn it over twice in the first quarter, and give them a touchdown on one of those turnovers, because they cannot score unless you give them points. And so that's what Sawyer Robertson did here. This was one of those where it's now 7-7, and you're like, it's one of those days, like you're just kind of preparing for what's going to be a dogfight, and it kind of was and it wasn't, but early on it was definitely a bit of a nerve-wracking experience as Robertson throws the pick six here.
Tempting fate again, thrown at Jeremiah Wilson, and this one was this is the one where there was no miscommunication. This was just a bad throw and a bad decision. Hal Presley just runs a hitch, and I mean, Jeremiah Wilson catches this ball kind of right in between Sawyer and Hal Presley. I mean, it was the easiest pick six he's probably had in his entire life. And it's one of those where you can't have that. Like you mentioned, you're running the ball well. They got 10 yards on 2 carries with Bryson Washington. They're in 1st and 10. And then you throw a pick six, 41 yards. And it's just one of those things, not taking advantage of opportunities to move the football consistently. And that's what happened kind of early for Baylor. And just, Sawyer hasn't made these these bad decisions really all year. So it's kind of, I think, shocking to see him make 2 of them in a game. And so I think in general for Baylor to kind of overcome that is still a big deal. But yeah, this was a big play. Now you're sitting at 7-7, and Houston's only sitting at 30 yards of total offense at this point in the game.
So 7-7, but Robertson would respond pretty well as they'd get the ball back, and with just not a lot of time, I guess they roll out the first quarter and in the second quarter, and not a lot of time's passed by, but you're already feeling a little bit nervous about what's going on because your quarterback's thrown a couple of uncharacteristic interceptions, one of them for points. The home crowd's believing, and you're just kind of like, man, how are they going to respond now? But they respond really well. 11 plays, 74 yards, 5.5 minutes as they just hold on and milk the clock and run the football with Bryson Washington and Richard Reese. But ultimately it's Sawyer Robertson hitting Ashton Hawkins for a couple of big gains, 16 yards, few carries from Washington Moore, get you near the red zone. And then again, it's Ashton Hawkins, a terrific catch from Sawyer Robertson, and the Bears are back in the end zone after a long drive, but a nice response to that pick, and it is 14-7. So now you're breathing a little easier because, again, a touchdown lead is like 10 points, 14 points, whatever, against Houston. You still need to add more, but it was a good response and at least ease the nerves for a few moments.
And you're running the ball well. Michael Trigg added another 20-yard reception on this. I mean, there were a lot of things that went into this that made this a really good drive. You ran a lot of plays. You established yourself up front. Sawyer looked very comfortable, which is nice to see after 2 interceptions. You could have easily seen him just kind of crater in this game, and he definitely didn't do that. You get down the field, you go up by 7 at a really pivotal point in the game where it feels like you've been outplaying Houston, but it's not showing up on the scoreboard. It finally did.
So the Cougs get the ball back, and they are forced to punt eventually as Zion Chris gets sacked by Elanus Noel and Keaton Thomas on 3rd down and 9 at around midfield. So the Cougars punt, and the Bears get the ball back with about 6 minutes to go in the half, and they will end up milking this thing all the way down to the very end of the second quarter, a 6-minute drive. So they milk it all the way to the very end and end the first half with an Isaiah Hankins 45-yard field goal to give them a 17-7 lead. So big-time drive to just put some more points on the board to extend your lead. Big-time kick by Isaiah Hankins, who, you never know with college kickers, and it can be a bit of a roller coaster and has been at times this year, but that was a big-time kick from 45, and so a nice way to close the first half. And I think up 10 now, you're feeling pretty good about, hey, if you just hold on, basically, you should win this football game. You've played pretty well. You've just had some mistakes that have kept this thing feeling a certain type of way. But yeah, I think it's not over, but you're feeling pretty good heading into the locker room here at 17-7.
You definitely are. Michael Trigg had a 42-yard reception on this drive, and then you get down to 3rd and goal, and this is one of the kind of just I had a bit of an issue here with them deciding to go Wildcat with Bryson Washington. I just felt like they were running the ball up the middle pretty consistently. You're at the Houston 2-yard line. Why not just hand the ball off like they'd been doing? And I know they wanted to add a wrinkle, but they've gone to the Wildcat a couple times, and it really has not worked out unless Sawyer Robertson has been the guy running it from that position. And so you end up with a snap over his head, and what would have been, a 20-yard field goal turns into a 45-yard field goal for Isaiah Hankins. He buries it, but it was, again, it felt good because you're up 17-7, but it also felt like you left some points on the table here when you really felt like you should probably be up 21-7 at halftime. But an interesting call leads to a long field goal, but Hankins drilled it, and he had a really good night.
Yeah, he did. I had a couple of really big kicks, but that was the nature of this being an ugly game, was that things didn't go your way, or things were a little bit sloppy at times, or had areas where you could have extended a lead or built a lead and just, didn't execute, or maybe didn't make the right call, or whatever the case was. But this is just kind of a slog of a game. It's like being in sort of quicksand. You're trying to get out of it and get a little bit of a rhythm, but it was just ugly. So you go into halftime up 17-7, feeling like it could be more, but feeling like you're fully in control here. And then Houston gets the ball to start the second half. They go 13 plays, 46 yards, and get some big conversions, including a 4th and 5, where Zion Chris is able to pick up a first down with his feet and get a fresh set of downs. But ultimately, they stall out around the Baylor 30-yard line or so, kind of hang around there, unable to move the football any further, and end up going for the 47-yard field goal to try and make it a one-score game, or one-score lead or game, and Jack Martin is no good. So all that for naught to start the second half for Houston, and Baylor gets the ball back, still up 17-7. So that's one of those that if you're Houston, that can't happen if you want to try and complete the upset. You'd had to get some points there, and just more of the same from them, where just getting points is like pulling teeth for them, basically. So, the pick six remains their only score at this point midway through the third quarter.
And these two drives to start the second half are going to be Houston's best two drives of the day. And for them to, miss this field goal right here, that is just, for an offense like this, that's a killer. And they really needed touchdowns in this game if they were really going to win it. And they end up missing a field goal here. Then you go into, Baylor 3 and out, and then Houston gets the ball back, goes on another drive, and it's just like, Houston's got to find a way to score touchdowns, and they were just unable to do that, and that's a credit to Baylor. They're playing a lot of bend but don't break defense here to start the third, and then aside from that, it was pretty much just a dominant day.
Yeah, Baylor went 3 and out. Houston gets the ball back. 13-play drive again. I mean, Mike, you'd think they were like the freaking like Bears in the 50s or something. All these long drives on the day by two teams who weren't putting up a lot of points, but they were sure holding on to the ball a long time. So 13 plays, 74 yards for the Cougars after the Baylor punt, and eventually they get into the red zone, but are, again, unable to punch it in, so they end up settling for a much shorter field goal this time around, 24 yards. This time, Jack Martin is good. Houston's got their first offensive points of the day, and it's now a 17-10 game, so the Bears still feeling okay, but now it's only a one-score game. You're only a Sawyer Robertson pick again from this turning back into a tie game, so you've got to be careful here. But it's 17-10, and then these teams would trade punts. Baylor goes 3 and out as Sawyer Robertson's unable to really get anything going on this drive. A couple of incompletions, run for no gain. Houston goes 3 and out as Zion Chris not able to really get anything going there. Baylor gets the ball back. They don't go 3 and out, but they do go 7 plays, 31 yards, get a big penalty on this drive, a holding on Michael Trigg, a delay of game also on this drive, and eventually you are forced to punt. Palmer Williams on 4th and 16 gives the ball back to Houston. So just a kind of back and forth here where both offenses are unable to get anything really going. Penalties are flying around. So, it's 17-10, and you're about to give Houston the ball back in what has been kind of an ugly start to the fourth quarter here.
It's 2 straight weeks now where Baylor's offense has shown up to start the second half and just not done anything. After, they weren't necessarily impressive in the first half of this game, but they were against West Virginia, and then to start the second half, they just didn't do anything. And so you saw it again in this game, and I don't know. I mean, 2 straight 3 and outs, that's not great. And then you show up a 7-play, 31-yard drive. That's all good. But I just felt like they went away from the run game a little bit too much in these situations. I know they got the holding call in this drive, but those first 2 drives, it felt like a lot of throwing the football and missed opportunities to maybe hand the ball off and continue to test Houston up front. And instead, they just were punting the football and taking hardly any time off the clock.
So there is 7.5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It's 17-10. Like, you felt in control, but if you don't score some points, like, you're really playing with fire here. No matter how bad Houston looks, it's still only 17-10. So it's just kind of a weird feel of, like, just needing to close this game out, and all it takes is a score, basically, to close this game out, even with 7.5 minutes left, because you just don't think Houston's going to put 2 scores together. So Houston gets the ball back, and they proceed to, backed up against their old goal line, get a little bit of yardage to at least get some breathing room. But on 1st and 10, Houston 17-yard line, Zion Chris intercepted by Lorando Johnson. A big pick for Lorando as the Bears get their second interception of the day, and they've got another one coming that will help ice this thing, but this was absolutely huge, and this was kind of like, all right, now go get some points and go close this game out. So Snacks with a big pick off Zeon Chris, and this is going to basically turn the tide of the whole game and lead to this stretch run that's going to close it on out. So this was an absolutely huge play and a killer turnover for Houston, who again, just cannot do much offensively.
And Snacks has been an unsung hero for Baylor this year. I think he's been pretty easily their best defensive back this year. He has been really good. And truthfully, I mean, if you have seen the way he's played now, if you go back in time and remember the BYU game where he got hurt like the first play of the game, and then BYU's able to hit on these explosive plays to the outside, and you just kind of sit there and wonder, had he not gotten hurt in that game, it might have been a different outcome. And he's been that good. He's been that, I think, instrumental into helping them defensively weather the storm that they've kind of gone through over the last few weeks. And this was a huge interception by him at a big time. I mean, 6:26 left, and this is first down, and you're going up and making a play on the football like that. It's massive. And I don't know that we necessarily talked about him that much when he came back from Arkansas this offseason. We kind of knew he'd be the starter, but already had seen him at Baylor, weren't sure how big the strides would be when he got here. We knew he'd play opposite Caden Jenkins, who everyone views as a superstar, and I still think he can be that. But Snacks has been awesome this year, and he was awesome once again.
Yeah, not that I'd say Jenkins is a good talent, nowhere near superstar, but he is kind of was viewed that way because he was a shining star in what was an otherwise pretty starless sky last year. So he just really beamed brighter, and being a young guy and a guy with turnovers and all that. But, yeah, far from superstar status, but certainly still a great player. But to have Snacks back has really boosted that room. You're right. And I think, I didn't make too much of it just because he'd come back. It's like, dude, you left, and then now you come back, and it's great to have you back, but I kind of want to see you, settle back in before we just start going, oh, thank God you're back, because, you still left, and I know it wasn't always necessarily his choice either, but you know what I mean? It's just like, all right, let's see how this works out. But it's worked out really well. He's meant to be at Baylor. That's very clear. His college career, he's meant to be a Bear, and so I think it's a very unique situation that leads to you returning to the school you left. That doesn't happen all that often, but I think in this case, the shoe definitely fits, and so it worked out beautifully for both parties to have that reunion this season. So he not only gets the interception here, but sets him up already in Houston territory, and after Dawson Pendergrass runs the ball for 3-4 and then gets dropped for a loss of 1, they barely move the ball at all, but they're still in good enough range to go ahead and boot the field goal. And Isaiah Hankins from 50 yards out is good, and that gives Baylor a 20-10 lead, gives them that double-digit lead with only 4.5 minutes remaining. So that was an absolutely huge interception and a big kick. And this game is basically over at this point because it's a 10-point lead with 4.5 minutes to go, and Houston is just not capable of scoring points that quickly. That was a huge exchange of big plays there by the Bears, defense and special teams, to go ahead and basically ice this one here.
But once again, this was another situation where the offense is put in a great position by the defense, and they just don't go anywhere, and they don't take any time hardly off the clock. It was just 2 minutes, and Hankins has to step up and hit a 50-yard field goal. He buried it, and you knew the game was over after that, but you also sat there and went, if he misses this, Houston's going to be in really good field position. It kind of felt like that might be the time where they actually go and score just because of game flow, even though the Baylor defense had played so well. Huge kick by Hankins, but once again, the defense had to make up for a lot of the mistakes of the offense in this game, and I found that to be quite refreshing because the offense has had to do that, over the second course of the season and really during this run.
Yeah, I mean, they'll get absolutely destroyed this weekend if they play like that on offense. But for one weekend, and especially against the opponent, it was fine because you've been good all year long. And this is an opponent, if you were going to struggle, that you could afford to actually struggle against. That doesn't mean you play down to your competition. It just means you got lucky this weekend that that's who you were playing. If you had been playing any other number of teams in the league, then you're probably losing this game. But you got that out of your system, hopefully, and you'll have a much better performance this week, albeit against a much tougher overall opponent. So you get the field goal there, and then another big turn of events as you get your third turnover of the day as Jack Stone kicks the ball off and Mekhi Muse fumble on the kickoff return. LeVar Thornton Jr. jumps on it for the Bears, and they get the ball back with under 4.5 minutes to play, up 10, and won't run the clock out here, but it's basically, it's over now at this point after you've done this. They would whittle the clock all the way down to 1 minute and 14 seconds remaining at the Houston 25-yard line on 4th and 4. They go for it, and Sawyer Robertson gets picked again for the hat trick on the day. Now, it doesn't matter big picture because, there's a minute left, but he does get picked at the 25-yard line. So there you go with that. But, yeah, Houston unable to do anything of note with it as Zeon Christ just 4 plays later and with only 16 seconds left, down by 10. So, the game's over with. But he gets picked as Devin Lemire gets the hat trick for the Bears secondary. And it was really weird. Like, every time Sawyer threw a pick, Zeon Christ threw a pick. It's like, so you got negated. And in this case, again, it didn't matter at this stage, but still it mattered for Devin Lemire to go get an interception. And that was a cool way to end this game. And that's how this game would, for all intents and purposes, end, as they would kneel it out after that. And there you have it, 20-10. Sawyer Robertson, 3 interceptions, but Zeon Christ, 3 interceptions. And Baylor, with a fumble recovery, gives them the turnover battle win. And that would prove to be very important in this game. A couple of big field goals from Isaiah Hankins and some tough running from Bryson Washington, some big catches from Michael Trigg and Ashton Hawkins, and some good defense and some bad offense for Houston. And that was basically all she wrote. This was the game you thought it was probably going to be. It was just there was the wild card of Robertson throwing all those picks that made it probably more interesting than it otherwise would have been. But you knew that there was a chance the offense could kind of slog down against Houston. That happened primarily because of the turnovers, but not just because of the turnovers, as we saw in a lot of these drives. Like, they just couldn't move the football or do much with it. So there you go, 20-10. It's a win. It's 5 straight. You're 7-4. I think all that's great, but you definitely know coming out of this game, you've got to play a lot better in your season finale, or Kansas is going to come in here and have its way with you with the way they're playing right now.
Absolutely. I do want to mention really quick, Josh White did create the fumble on the kickoff return, just to give him some credit there before LeVar Thornton picked it up. I also felt like Baylor should have just kicked the field goal instead of going for it on 4th and 4, up by 10. Decided to try to put the game away. I understand it, but I felt like you might as well just kick the field goal there and extend the lead a little bit. But yeah, pretty easy to say the defense had an awesome day. I think they played really well. They did everything they possibly could, in my eyes, to keep Houston to, 3 points in this game. The touchdown was an interception return. They were great, I felt like, all day long. Shut down the run game, shut down the pass game, were very consistent, and were even able to get out of really tough situations that the offense put them in. This was the worst day for the offense during this stretch that Baylor has been on. I think that that's a little bit fluky. I think they just had some things that went wrong. I think they're correctable things, and I don't think this is necessarily who they are, but you're exactly right. They're going to have to play a whole lot better on the offensive side if they're going to beat Kansas this weekend.
So now it's the Jayhawks rolling into McLean Stadium, 11 a.m. kickoff, regular season finale. Bears 7-4, 5-3. They're guaranteed to finish above 500, which I think is also notable. That hasn't happened since 2021 when they won the Big 12, because, of course, they finished 6-7 in the follow-up, and then last year, obviously, well below 500. But they get the Kansas Jayhawks, who started off the year really rough note, lost some close games, and then have gone on this run where basically you take that schedule that Baylor had in the first half of the season that was so difficult, and they lost all those games. That's the schedule that Kansas has just ripped through. They beat Colorado. They beat Iowa State. Like, they just ripped through that schedule. They beat BYU in the midst of that as well. Should have beaten Kansas State, arguably. So, yeah, they have been on a tear and on a spot in the calendar where their schedule actually looks like it got tougher towards the end. They actually started winning games. So, like, that's point being the kind of the heater that they're on is they're not just winning games, they're beating like good teams too while they're doing it. And all the teams that were at the top of the league and in contention, they've basically been almost single-handedly responsible for throwing the Big 12 into standings chaos because of them handing losses to contenders back-to-back-to-back weeks. So they're coming in fiery now at 5-6, 4-4 in the Big 12. They can finish above 500 in league play, which is pretty remarkable. They can also get to a bowl game, which is, when you start off 1-5, also pretty remarkable. So it's been quite the last month for them. The win over Colorado last week, that Colorado had to, basically controlling their own destiny. They ripped that away from Dion and company, grabbed the bag, and ran away with it. The week prior to that, they go to Provo, beat BYU to take away BYU's full control of the league. The week prior to that, they beat Iowa State 45-36, and the week prior to that, that loss to Kansas State in Manhattan where Jalen Daniels fumbles late, or otherwise they probably win that game as well. So, man, wins over Iowa State, BYU and Provo, and then Colorado last weekend. What are your thoughts on the Kansas Jayhawks, who, if there was a team that could say they're hotter than Baylor, Kansas is right there at the top of the list?
They really are. It's pretty much Kansas, Arizona State, and Baylor are the hottest teams in the Big 12 right now. And you can make the case that those are the three best teams in the Big 12 at this very moment, even though the whole season does matter. I understand that. But playing the best football right now. Intriguing thing with Kansas, their schedule, we knew it was tough coming in, but it was exceptionally tough. I mean, they've only played two teams that aren't bowl teams, and that's Houston and Lindenwood. There are two non-conference games. I believe Illinois and UNLV are still ranked. So two ranked teams in the top 25. And then the rest of their teams are bowl teams that they've had to play. This has been a real gauntlet for them. They started 1-4, and I know they started 1-5, but let's just do the 1-4 part first. They had 11 turnovers in those first 5 games. Since then, they've only had 3. That's been a huge difference in their season. They were just giving away football games. Like, let's be honest. They had 4 turnovers against Illinois, and they only lost by 6. They had 2 against UNLV, only lost by 3. 2 against West Virginia, only lost by 4. These turnovers really came back to haunt them in a few of these games and really cost them from starting the season at least 500 or maybe a little bit better than that. And since then, it's been a lot of consistency, a lot of taking care of the football, a lot of really good performances, especially on the offensive side. When you look at 37 on Colorado, 45 points on Iowa State, 42 points on Houston, even 31 points on Arizona State on the road is pretty impressive as well. They've really gotten things rolling, and they're clearly a different team than what we saw at the beginning of the year. They still have deficiencies, but they are a much improved football team at this point.
So Baylor will be the first team they have played in about 6 weeks who is not ranked in the top 20. That is good news for Kansas that their schedule's lighting up. Probably bad news for Baylor that Kansas has been coming in so battle-tested. Number 16, K-State. Number 17, Iowa State. Number 6, BYU. Number 16, Colorado. And wins over these last 3 weeks over 17, 6, and 16. That's pretty incredible, that run right there. But, yes, they played a very tough schedule, dug themselves out of a hole. And Jeff Grimes is cooking. They wanted his head early on in the season. They lost Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State. Penn State's obviously having a lot of success, but that was a loss for them on paper and probably not accounted for enough maybe in some preseason projections. But now they've dug out of that hole where people were wanting Grimes' job and changes in the middle of the season, and he's in his bag again, and he's like, when he's at his best and he's got good personnel, he's a lot of fun to watch. There's also times where, yeah, it's like bogs down, it gets a little repetitive, whatever, but they're cooking right now. And Jeff Grimes, I would imagine, also wants to get a little measure of, hey, you guys, we went our separate ways. I'm back and rolling in, want to get bowl eligible. Kansas has, the win streak, but also they win this game. They get bowl eligible out of a 1-5 start. That's pretty incredible. So they've got that motivation. Grimes, I'm sure, wants to perform well against his old team, but he's really turned this thing around. The biggest reason why, outside of having an incredible running back like Devin Neal, is Jalen Daniels is playing more like the Jalen Daniels that people saw, prior to the injuries last year, really derailing him, playing like the all Big 12 type of a talent that he is. So their offense, man, they've got a really good quarterback. They've got a great running back in Devin Neal and other good backs as well, but a great one in Devin Neal. And they've also got a really talented group of wideouts and whatnot as well for Jalen Daniels to target. So what are your thoughts on the Baylor defense and just kind of what they're looking at this weekend?
The Baylor defense is probably in trouble going into this matchup. I don't anticipate that they're going to be able to completely stop Kansas by any means. I think that this is probably going to be a shootout. That's kind of what I'm expecting. Maybe not an extreme where both teams are in the 40s, but I do think you'll probably see high 30s for both of these teams. I think it's going to be a really entertaining game. And it's interesting because Kansas's strength is the run game, and I would say Baylor's strength is stopping the run. And so it's probably going to get into a situation where Kansas is going to continue to try to run the football, establish line up front. Can Baylor take that away to some extent? Because if they can, and you force Jalen Daniels to truly be a pocket passer, have to make all the throws, have to make all the right decisions, that's where I think you can get Kansas in trouble. And that's what Baylor, I think, is going to have to do in this game. I think at times they're going to give up some big rushing plays. I think it's probably going to come down to, can they get stops in the red zone? It's probably going to be where this game comes down to for both sides, honestly. Because let's be honest, I think we come into this game and everyone's talking about Kansas and their explosive offense and how good they've been on the offensive side. And it's like, well, you know, if you actually go through the last 2 months, Baylor has the best offense in the Big 12, and it's really not that close. I mean, they're in the top 10 in yards per play, top 10 in points, top 10 in total yards. No other team in the Big 12 has those numbers over the last 2 months of the season. So I think it's important to remember that as we go into this matchup, and we're seeing a Kansas defense that per SP Plus is number 65 in the nation. When Baylor's faced teams that are above the top 50, Baylor's averaging 40.8 points per game. So just keep that in mind going into this matchup. I know there's a lot of love for Kansas going into it. Understandably, Dave Aranda called them the best team that they're going to play all year. But just keep in mind that Baylor on the offensive side has a lot of advantages as well going against this Kansas defense. And once again, I'm anticipating a shootout in which both defenses struggle.
So, expect the offense to have a little bit of success. Expect the shootout. Expect the defense to struggle. What else, if anything, jumps out to you about Kansas outside of just them being also red hot, as I've outlined here on a couple of different occasions already?
So this offense does run around Devin Neal, their running back. He is tremendous. I mean, I don't know that Baylor's faced a better running back this year. He currently has a PFF grade of 87.7, which is absolutely elite. He was electric against Colorado. I mean, he basically won that game for them on the offensive side of the ball. And Baylor's going to have to do everything they can to contain him. And he's an NFL running back, NFL talent, the kind of running back that, you know, in the wide zone scheme just fits perfectly. And that's going to be a huge challenge. So he's kind of the guy I'm looking at. Can Baylor slow him down to a certain level to force Jalen Daniels and these veteran receivers to really punish them in the secondary, which they haven't necessarily proven that they've been able to do consistently this season, is kind of what I'm looking at on that side. Defensively, Kansas just has a lot of playmakers. You know, they got a lot of guys who are really talented and guys who I think are, potential NFL talents. I mean, Kobe Bryant is awesome at cornerback. He's been really good for a few years now, bursted on the scene as a freshman. Mello Dotson is their other cornerback who is really good. So you got two guys who are just absolute guys who can stop you on the outside. And that's going to be a challenge for Josh Cameron and Hal Presley, which means I think once again, Baylor should be attacking the middle of the field with Ashton Hawkins, Michael Trigg, and then of course trying to run the football against a Kansas team that is pretty mediocre stopping the run. They're 8th in the Big 12 in run defense. They're right around Texas Tech and West Virginia, who Baylor ran all over both of them.
So there is a little bit on Kansas. It's going to be a hell of a game, man. I mean, these are two red-hot teams. I keep using that phrase, but I don't know. I mean, scorching hot, lava hot. I mean, you get the point. They are 9-1 combined in their last 10 games together. So they are about as consistent over the last 5-6 weeks as any two programs in the country. And that one loss was that KSU-KU loss, that 29-27 loss in Manhattan for the Jayhawks that is the only interruption they've had in this streak of theirs where they've won 4 out of the last 5. If not for that blip, it would be 4 straight top 25 wins and 5 straight wins. Like, that's how ridiculous of a run that they are on. Just 2 points separating them from 4 straight top 25 wins, including 2 on the road in Manhattan and Provo.
And once again, that Kansas State game came down to turnovers.
Yeah.
It's the only game during this run where they've had multiple turnovers, and it cost them because K-State only turned it over once, and you lost by 2 points. It was literally the game.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Jalen Daniels had a late fumble, and then you never know. But that to me, watching that game live, felt like he fumbled away their win, basically. So regardless, he's played really well. Not bagging on him, but it was a critical turnover. The season felt lost at that point in time because you had so many close losses, but they've turned it around to their credit and turned it into a potential bowl season, which is a amazing feat given where they were. So we'll get more into Kansas, I'm sure, in some of the mailbag questions. But before we get to that, let's touch on basketball very briefly as just throw a little bit of time their way here. The Baylor men were in the Bahamas championship this past week, and they beat St. John's, number 22, Red Storm, get a nice top 25 win there in double overtime, 99-98 last Thursday. So that was good to see as they moved to 4-1, a thrilling victory. Scott Drew beats Rick Pitino again, but then turn around and take on number 11 Tennessee in the Bahamas championship, and it was all of all 77-62 as they beat the Bears and bring their island trip to a close. So now they will be back at it tomorrow afternoon at the Foster Pavilion on ESPN+. It'll be a 1 o'clock tip-off against New Orleans. So the only game this week is they will also head into Thanksgiving, and they get number 2 UConn next week. But I don't really care about next week because we'll have a show before then. So New Orleans this week, the loss to Tennessee, the win over St. John's. Quick thoughts on Scott Drew and the men.
No, I don't think enough people are talking about the St. John's win. Now, it was a huge comeback by Baylor, but Baylor kind of took control of that game in the second half. Just couldn't quite close out the game until, obviously, Jeremy Roach hits that buzzer beater to win it. That's a big win. I think St. John's is a pretty quality basketball team. Ken Pom has them rated as the number 14 team in the country. So that's going to be a big win, I think, when it comes around to March. Tough loss to Tennessee. Tennessee's really good, and I think we've seen from Baylor so far this year when they face the upper echelon teams in college basketball, which they faced 2 top 5 Ken Pom teams in Tennessee and Gonzaga. Baylor got routed by both of them. So they're just not quite on that level yet. And a big part of it is because their defense has just been really bad so far this year. They're 67th in Ken Pom in defensive rating, 7th in offensive rating, and overall they're number 20 right now in Ken Pom. Decent spot to be, but they really need to improve on the defensive side, and they really need to figure out ways in these tougher matchups to just put up more of a fight. I mean, whether it's from getting stops on defense or scoring consistently in those matchups, it's really one of those things where you just kind of look at it and go, man, you know, what level is this team at? You know, are they going to actually be able to compete in the Big 12? And my answer to that right now is no. They need to make big steps in the right direction. Now, understand a lot of these other teams in Big 12 have not been challenged like Baylor has. So keep that in mind as we move forward. I expect Baylor to pick up quite a few more wins in the non-conference, but also have the big challenge against UConn, who is also a top 5 team according to Ken Pom.
All right, on the women's side of things, on the Bahamas, the battle for Atlantis, they beat Southern Miss 101-55, drop their next game to Indiana 73-65, and then close it out with a win on Monday, 73-62 over Villanova. So a 2-1 record down at the battle for Atlantis for the Baylor women. Nikki Collin and company now 5-2, and they are off until the end of the week when they will also take on New Orleans out at the Foster Pavilion, and then Louisiana Tech also at home on Sunday. So a couple of home games coming up at the end of this week, Friday and Sunday. A little Black Friday afternoon action for you if you want to go check out a game at Foster Pavilion at the end of this week.
Nice to see them at 5-2, but 2 unranked losses to Oregon and IU are kind of putting a damper on the start to the season. They have a lot of kind of easier matchups coming up, which should give them a chance to improve the record. But those losses definitely are kind of glaring when you look at who they might play in conference play.
Yeah, so long way to go. Basketball just getting started, but also still, very important here early on with some of the Ken Palm rankings and all that, and how all that adds up towards the end of the year, quality wins, and everything that comes with that territory. So interesting start for both teams, a little up, a little down, but long way to go. We'll see how it plays out over the course of these next few weeks, but conference play not too far away now at this point. So reason for some concern on the men's side, I think definitely based on what you've seen right now as far as the big picture. All right, so to the mailbag to close this episode on out, and we'll get to as many as we can before time runs out here. AF Blue 82, I've noticed Sawyer has completely abandoned the quarterback run, even scrambled these last few games, even when the situation might call for it. Do you think that's an intentional adjustment by Spav and Sawyer, or it just hasn't been needed? Wondering if the precautionary boot from a few weeks back has anything to do with it.
I think it hasn't been needed, so I don't think they've called a lot of design quarterback runs, but I do think it's also been an intentional thing with Sawyer not taking off and running very much. That is his game. I mean, we've seen Sawyer play quite a few games now during his career. He does like to take off and run and get downhill and make plays with his feet. I think that we're going to see more of that this weekend, and I actually think that could be the difference in the game as Baylor takes on Kansas, because I don't think people have recognized that he's not running the football very much. I know you have, but I don't know that a lot of people have, and I think that's going to be an adjustment they make this week, as it's the last game. It's kind of, do or die. Go out, finish your season strong. You get quite a few weeks off before a bowl game, so you might as well let it all ride.
Yeah, I mean, on average, you're probably getting at least 3 weeks to get ready for your bowl game, if not a month. So I think, you'll take your ball after this weekend, get healed up, and just hopefully he stays as healthy as possible. And you're right. I mean, he hasn't ran the ball all that much, and that is a play up his sleeve that he can pull out from time to time. Rockwall Bear, who will play Dave Aranda in the movie made about Baylor after winning the Big 12 title, making the CFP, and winning it all this year? Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Do you have an actor in mind?
No, I mean, I was trying to think in my head of anybody who would make some sense, and I'm at a loss. I'm also not we probably need like Paul Catalina, who's like all Mr. Hollywood, with some random ass actor on HBO or something that, some of the like 1,000 shows that he watches, I'm sure there's somebody, but I don't have anybody in mind, no.
Yeah, I don't either, because you also have to, the look has to be the same, and I can't think of anyone who looks like Dave Aranda.
No.
That makes it tough.
Yeah, the only one is like back in the day, like Yul Brynner. Like, could have been Dave Aranda probably. Could have probably passed off for him with the bald head. But that, he's been passed away for like 30 years now. So he can't, he's unavailable. But, yeah, if you could do the time machine thing, then maybe that would be a good one. All right, good question there. Let's see. Bear Sack, who do you think has the bigger advantage in this game, if any? Grimes versus Aranda's defense or Aranda versus Grimes' offense?
I mean, I think it's Grimes. I think both offenses have the advantage in this game. So, sure, Grimes versus Aranda's defense, I think, will have the advantage. I think they're going to play well. But I think that's more of a function of, which side of the ball is more talented, not necessarily the scheme.
Yeah, I think Grimes is cooking, though. Like, when he's got his mojo going, it really is a beautiful thing, like some of the play calls. But when it's off a little bit, man, it is his last year here, man, that was such a slog. I mean, that was such a hard year to get through. And it wasn't all on his offense, but that offense could do like little to nothing. And if you've got the right parts, Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, like he's got a lot of fun weapons, the older players as well. But yeah, I think both offenses are in the driver's seat here as strengths. So I look at it as less Grimes versus Aranda, like as far as knowing like having some intellectual advantage, or I just think they're just play wise, the offenses for both sides are playing better. Who was stopping the run priority number one this week? Who on defense needs to have a banner game to make it happen?
I'm thinking Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones. Those are the two at linebacker. They're going to have to play really well in this game to shut down Devin Neal to some extent.
Bear Cool 1 2 3 4. What happens more for Baylor leading up to signing day? Baylor flips a guy or guys flip from Baylor?
I'll go with Baylor flips a guy.
Yeah, I saw who was it visiting Oklahoma? Caleb Burns.
So Caleb Burns visited. So did Cade Knighton. But I view the Knighton one as more of a he's in Oklahoma, went with friends to the game type thing. But Caleb Burns, yeah, I mean, he's been recruited by Oklahoma a lot. He was always planning on taking a visit there. He took the visit to Oregon, and Baylor kind of did a good job of overcoming that trip. We'll see on this one. It was a very recent one, and, it is one of those things where Oklahoma put together a really good performance in front of him, obviously, beating Alabama. But you have to wonder if that performance for Oklahoma is really going to matter more than what Baylor has done over the last, few weeks here. And especially the fact that Caleb Burns is probably, I would expect that he's going to come to Baylor this weekend for the Baylor game against Kansas as well, just because they got knocked out of the playoffs by Katy this past week.
You know what I like about this era is I care a lot less about these high school decisions than I used to, just simply because you can overcome them a lot easier if they do happen. I don't mean to say that you don't want Caleb Burns. I absolutely want to see him sign and get developed and all of that. But compared to 3 or 4 years ago, if he was taking business to Oklahoma, he'd be like, oh, my God, no. And now it's like, I mean, there's definitely going to be people who are still saying, oh, my God, no. But for me, at least, I'm like, all right, well, just have to go to the transfer portal, I guess. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a big deal, but it's just not as big of a deal, like life or death, like it used to feel when you couldn't just go replace guys. You know what I mean?
I definitely agree with that. I think there are rare circumstances where you see a recruit who could play as a true freshman, for instance. So, Torian York, the impact he had at A&M as a freshman, Caleb Burns is kind of that level of prospect, at least in my eyes, where he could play as a freshman. That's a little tougher to overcome. Also, in general, like you mentioned, easier to overcome in a 1-year sample, because you can find a transfer for a year to bridge the gap. A lot tougher, though, to build consistency of your program if you're not landing guys in the high school ranks.
Wyatt Smith, what does Baylor need to do well to beat Kansas?
Run the football well. They need to run it with Bryson Washington and control the game, control the tempo, and control time of possession, at least to a certain extent. Which
players will have a big game versus Kansas?
Bryson Washington, Keaton Thomas, Steve Linton, and Ashton Hawkins.
Yeah, I don't have anybody in mind. I think it might be – the secondary had some big picks this weekend, but, you might need, a pick six or something in this game. You could always use a pick six, but, just some kind of a – I'm thinking you're going to need kind of a game-changing type special teams or defensive
Josh Cameron
play.
return or something, yeah.
I think you need something like that. Maybe Josh Cameron finally pops one.
I think Sawyer's going to have a bounce-back game as well. I do want to mention that as the quarterback.
I would hope so. That was some kind of puzzling decision-making at times on Saturday, but hopefully he got that out of his system, and he'll give some credit to Houston to some extent as well. Who will be the next to flip for 25 and commit for 26? Thank you as always. Thank you, Wyatt.
The next one. I've been consistent thinking that it's going to be Zay Gentry, the cornerback out of Anna. I still think Baylor's in a good spot there. It is puzzling that it's taken so long for him to kind of decide on that, or at least announce that he's locked into SMU. Or
maybe he's waiting to see if they make the playoff.
Yeah, he might be
right there in the mix.
That definitely could be a part of it. He's been one that I've had my eye on for a while. There's a few others who I've mentioned on the premium site, so be sure to check that out. As far as the 2026 class goes, I think there's, again, quite a few guys that Baylor's in a good spot for. But I think Devin Robinson out of Pasadena Memorial has been the guy that I've been most kind of just looking at and thinking, hey, I think he could be the next guy. He visited a lot this year for Baylor games, and I think there's a good relationship that's been built there.
AF Blue 82, excited for the Trig breakout game. Do you think that was a result of the matchup with middle of the field open, or was it a sign of things to come? I know Sawyer spreads it around, but Trig feels like a mismatch on pretty much anyone.
I think the middle of the field is where they need to attack. I think it's going to be very similar to this week. Kansas has really good cornerbacks, so you need to attack the middle of the field as much as you can. I think that's where Michael Trigg and Ashton Hawkins can really thrive, and maybe even Monterey Baldwin can produce an explosive play in this one.
Yeah, I know we didn't get super in depth on the KU preview because we've got time limitations, and we're gonna answer some of these, but Jayhawks do have some bona fide corners, and Kobe Bryant's an absolute dude. So these receivers are gonna really have to be tough and take full advantage of what comes their way, like making tough catches and. Yeah. making the most of every time the ball comes their way, because they're going to have the work cut out for them, and that's why the run game is going to be so important, because Sawyer Robertson might play a cleaner game, but I don't know that they're going to be able to just whip it around and throw it around against these TBs, because they are amongst the best in the Big 12. So, yeah, that's going to be a challenge for them for sure. All right, let's see. Elayer, what do you think about the job Mason Miller has done with the O-line?
Incredible. I mean, I don't know that there's an adjective that I can use for this. He's been phenomenal. I mean, this performance, this turnaround over the season, the way he's developed guys, it's been sensational.
Yes, it has. He's done a great job. I mean, given where they were at the beginning of the year, seemingly more of the same that we'd seen the past past like season and a half, when the kind of downslide really started midway through 2022, and then all the way up until like the midway point of this year. So like 2 years basically. The offensive line was dreadful at times, especially most of last year. And man, I mean, they're putting up big time yardage on the ground consistently. Bryson Washington has a lot to do with that as well. But I mean, they've established a run game, which I thought was impossible early in the year. I thought they were going to have to be kind of like they were last year, of just like throw it around and hope good things happen. But they've actually become like a running team, and to be able to like flip that is pretty remarkable. I mean, it really is. So he's done a great job.
He's done it with a lot of different like development arcs, right? Because you got 2 transfers with Fugar and Egbedian. You got a guy who was kind of written off as he may never play at Baylor, and Ryan Lignell. He's now a starter, a firmly entrenched starter. Colton Price, kind of a development guy who's just grown and grown as a young player. And then, of course, Campbell Barrington, who many people did not want to start at the beginning of the year because they didn't like what they saw from him a year ago. And he's been probably their best offensive lineman. It's been really remarkable to see what he's been able to do with a bunch of different guys.
Yeah, I mean, they've had a lot of turnover there, both player and coach-wise, the last couple of years. So, yeah, really cool to see the offensive line being able to be proud and confident and play hard and play well. It's great for that group, especially the ones that have been around for a couple of years. Also, why isn't Snow in the conversation for D.C.?
Because Aranda's the D.C. right now?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Phil Snow, who is you're referring to there, lives around the Waco area still, but he was basically semi-retired and just going around and basically being like hey, come in and look at our program and see what you see, you know, kind of just like an analyst type of guy, freelance. And I think now he's been helping Matt Rule. And Nebraska just got bowl eligible, which was a big mark for them. First time that's happened in several years for that program. So, yeah, he's been helping out his buddy Matt Rule, and Matt Rule just, hired Dana Holgerson as his OC, and so I think he's been a part of that stretch run, just trying to get them over the hump. But, yeah, he's doing a lot – or consulting was the word I was looking for. He's doing a lot of consulting, but I think he's been helping Nebraska as of late. And, yeah, Dave, to answer your question, it was Dave Aranda's the DC. That's why. Brent 260, are the Bears tired about hearing about Kansas yet? They're good, it's true, so are we, as we've won 5 straight as well. Let's go pluck some feathers and ride into bowl season on a high.
Right, and Kansas is actually 4-1 during this stretch. Baylor's won 5 straight. The competition's been a little bit different. I understand that, but I do feel like the national media is basically just chalking this up as a win for Kansas, and Vegas is like, not so fast. Baylor's still the favorite in this game. Baylor still has a lot of momentum going into this game, and I do think people are kind of writing that off a little bit because of who Kansas has beaten, and kind of forgetting that Kansas hasn't played an offense like Baylor's during this stretch. And we can go back and forth and argue, and that's fine, but based on numbers, based on stats, what they've done over the last 2 months, they have not played an offense as good as Baylor's and as multiple as Baylor's.
All right, stretch time here. K-Sig Bear, based on the remaining prospects on the board and our current commit list for 2025, what is our class ranking at floor and ceiling to finish out?
I think 40 is probably the floor. I think they're currently at 35, according to 247. I think the ceiling is probably somewhere around like 28, 27, something along those lines.
6158 for life. Which players who are leaving after this season will we upgrade from his replacement the most in 2025?
Which player upgrade? Okay, that's a tough question. Tough word. So who's Baylor replacing next year?
Who's leaving that they can upgrade from?
Okay. I mean, I think that they can probably get better. Maybe Man, they've been good at a lot of places. I don't think they're going to be able to replace Matt Jones with someone better than Matt Jones. You might be able to find someone comparable. I don't think you're going to replace Lorando with someone better. Again, you might find someone kind of comparable to Lorando, but he's had such a good year. I mean, a lot of guys are returning. That's the other part of this. Campbell Barrington's been really good, so I don't know if they're going to find a right tackle who's been better than him. Their running backs are coming back. They're going to replace 5 receivers. You might be able to find someone who will be better than Monterey Baldwin, maybe more productive than Hal Presley and Ketron Jackson. I could see that. Could see some guys replacing there and maybe finding higher ceiling guys at receiver. At Jack, it's going to be tough to replace Steve Linton and Garmin Randolph. So, yeah, it's going to be difficult. I think they just need to find some guys who are really talented, and obviously they're going to spend NIL this offseason, but we also have to take into account that a lot of their guys have really hit this year that they got from the portal.
All right, that's a better question for like getting the off season. We can like spend some time on that, but yeah, I mean, there's a few spots I suppose you could, but that's a hypothetical that'll really be able to stretch your legs more in a non-game week. If the chaos scenario manifests and Baylor wins the Big 12 Conference Championship, will we make the playoff? I think you technically probably would, but, I mean, it's so far out of the realm of possibility, but I don't know that to be sure. I mean, they definitely wouldn't be a top 4 seed, but I'm not even considering this possibility, so...
I think if they won out, they should.
Yeah,
they
would be like the 12 seed or something.
Yeah, probably. You'd have to be ranked ahead of Tulane. That's the key. Because if Tulane and Boise State are both ranked ahead of you, then there's 5 conference champions, and you'd get left out. So you'd have to be ahead of Tulane, which I think they'd get to if they beat Kansas this week, and then followed it up by beating, let's say, Arizona State, who'd probably going to be like number 12 in the country during that matchup. I think they'd probably get in, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 0.5% chance, but yeah, there's a chance, so we'll see. Lomer Superfan, what is your overall concern level with the Baylor men's basketball team? The 2 losses in a vacuum are concerning given the opponents, but the blowouts scare me. What do you expect against UConn? I don't expect to win that one, but they need to find a way to be very competitive. So overall concern level and expectations against UConn next week.
I still think they're a contender in the Big 12, so I'm not red alert, and I think they're going to lose to UConn probably by 10 or more points, especially on the road. That's going to be a tough one.
Yep, that's going to be real tough, and they just got beat yesterday, as a matter of fact, in a close game, so had a big Dan Hurley response after that game, as he is pretty unique type of guy. Some love him, some hate him, but they're a very good basketball team. And, yeah, I'm starting to get into basketball season here, but this is the final week of regular season football. So, big week, big game on Saturday against Kansas. And, Grayson, I guess do you have any thoughts on we got very little amount of time here, but any thoughts on, does chaos happen in the Big 12? We don't have time for all these games. Does chaos happen in the Big 12 this weekend, or is it going to be Arizona State handles their business, Iowa State handles their business, and it's Arizona State, Iowa State, and Arlington?
So I don't think Iowa State's going to handle their business. I think Kansas State's going to beat them, and then I think that's going to lead to Arizona State versus, I believe, BYU. I think BYU and Colorado are both going to win as well, and then BYU is going to face Arizona State in a rematch in the Big 12 title. The winner will get into the college football playoff. I think the winner, if it is that game, should also be a top 4 seed. I don't think there's any reason why Boise State should be ranked ahead of them if they are able to get it done in a Big 12 championship setting. That's kind of what I expect to happen this weekend in the Big 12. I think Iowa State's kind of due to lose again. They just have not been performing at a high enough level.
Boise State has played one top 25 team. That is also the team they lost to. But, hey, they lost close, so it counts as a good win, right?
Right.
For some people, apparently. Yeah, like their loss is their best win. And they have no other top 25 wins. BYU right now has a couple top 25 wins. And
an SMU win.
Well, that's one of their top 25
I know, but that's
wins.
A college football playoff type win.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see if they can beat Miami. But, so they've got a better schedule. So does Arizona State. I don't think it's anything other than Ashton Genty hype, and I really like Ashton Genty, but I don't think they're in any way a better team than whoever wins the Big 12 championship. But we'll see. The committee thinks their way, and the national media doesn't really give a damn about the Big 12, if we're being perfectly honest about it. So that leaves us here with one game to predict. With the time we have, Baylor and Kansas, who do you have?
So I think this is going to be a shootout, like I mentioned. Currently, the over-under 61.5. Baylor's a 1-point favorite in this game. Or actually, Kansas, it looks like, has flipped it to a 1-point favorite. But either way, it's basically a push going into this one. I think it's going to hit the over. I think both these teams are going to score a lot of points. I'm going to take Baylor to win this one, though. I think Baylor's playing really well with a lot of confidence. I think people are underestimating how good Baylor has been during this stretch and giving a lot of credit to Kansas, which they deserve. But I just think Baylor's also they're set up to attack Kansas's defense and score some points in this game. So give me Baylor in a close one, 38-35.
Yeah, I'll have my, as always, official prediction in the staff predictions article at the end of the week, but I'm slightly leaning Kansas right now. They're just so red hot that it's hard to overlook the brand of football they're playing right now. I don't know what to expect from the crowd on Saturday because it's Thanksgiving weekend, and Baylor fans are just – it's not like you just show up and there's 50,000 strong every time. Like it's very, very hit or miss to the point of like – detrimental at times, and I don't know what the holiday weekend of really what to anticipate as far as the turnout. So I don't think there's going to be some great advantage, even though they've won 5 straight games. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like everybody packs it out. I don't know. So I think there's not really anything working too much in your favor there. And so I think this is just straight up just two teams who are playing really good football, and I think Kansas is a little bit better right now. So I'm slightly leaning Kansas as we speak today, but check for my prediction on, I guess that'll be Friday, and I'll maybe have changed my mind or maybe not. Maybe I'm only further cementing my Kansas pick. We'll see on that. But I don't think you can go wrong if you pick Kansas here. I don't think you can go wrong if you pick Baylor here. I think it's a bit of a toss-up game, and it's just, what do you consider more important over the last few weeks,
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you go back and flip some of their one-score games, I mean, what if we were talking about these two teams both being, in that, 8-9-2 range or 8-3 range, like what this game could mean. And I think both these teams have played at that caliber over the last 2 months, but they just didn't get it done early in the year.
Nope, they both buried themselves a little bit. So, yeah, had to play catch-up, and it's going to leave them both short of the Big 12 title game, most likely. Kansas for sure, Baylor most likely, but who knows? Maybe there is some chaos in store, but for Baylor, they've got to beat Kansas first, and, again, that is easier said than done. So we will see quite a game, I expect, on Saturday, and the close of the regular season. For Garrett Ross, we're out of time here. For Grayson Grundhoefer, hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you guys. Everybody out there listening, safe travels. Hope you have a great time with family and friends. Grayson, anything before we go here?
Just happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Enjoy the holidays. Spend it with family and friends, and just be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Subscribe button as always before you go. And just thank you for listening. Thank you for sending in questions for those of you who do that as well. And again, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll be talking the end of the regular season and signing day and all that good stuff as well. So a lot still to come. But until next time, I'm Craig Smoak for Grayson Grundhoefer and Garrett Ross, and this has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.